Again, it's complicated by the fact that we did try to invade Cuba using Cuban nationalists in the Bay of Pigs. That was a disaster.
Also,
the CIA,
Operation Northwoods.
Operation Northwoods.
That's one of the creepiest ones.
Oh, totally.
The fact that was a real conspiracy, that they were really planning on blowing up a drone jetliner and blaming it on the Cubans. They were going to arm Cuban friendlies and attack Guantanamo Bay, all to get us to go to war with Cuba. It's pretty wild that was signed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and vetoed by Kennedy.
And McNamara, he didn't go for it either. But this is an example, again, of constructive conspiracism. It's not irrational to think that a lot of conspiracy theories might be true because enough of them have been, or COINTELPRO, where the FBI was sending in agents to act as social justice activists in American Indian movement, feminist groups, the Black Panthers, and so on, and including blackmailing Martin Luther King Jr. Recording his sexcapades in hotel rooms. I mean, our government was doing this? What?
In this next clip, this young lady talks about Operation Northwoods in depth, and I love the way she talks about it in detail and really sheds light on exactly what the plan was in Operation Northwoods. So let's listen to that clip.
How far would the U.S. government go in order to justify going to war with another country? Would they stage hijackings? Maybe terror attacks on their own soil or soil abroad? Would they kill innocent people? Hold fake funerals for people who they said had died but never existed in the first place? They wouldn't do that, would they? Operation Northwoods, a 1962 declassified document. This was prepared by the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the Secretary of Defense. Then it went on to JFK, who ultimately said, "Nuh-uh, we're not doing this," which is a good thing because the plan in here is absolutely insane. Let's take a look at it. Little background first. At the time, Fidel Castro was ruling Cuba. The U.S. didn't like that. They wanted to replace him with someone who aligned with U.S. interests. They tried assassinating him. They tried inciting a revolt within the country. It wasn't happening fast enough. So they decided, we got to go in with the military, but it has to be justified on the world stage and with our own U.S. people. So they came up with 9 tactics of, here's what we can do in order to justify it. By looking at these, even though they weren't approved, we can see that maybe we need to start to question things that have happened in the world. Maybe the past, present, and future. Can we believe what the government says actually happened, or was it all staged? Let's take a look at the 9 tactics because I think they're interesting. We're going to go into the details here because I like the details. The first one is super basic. It's basically we're going to do exercises close to Cuba's coast, and we're going to send little whispers through the underground so that they think that a U.S. attack is imminent. So perhaps Cuba will be on the defensive and attack first. We'll maintain the posture that, oh no, these were just exercises, but we'll go in and be justified to use our military on their soil. The second one is a little bit more interesting. They plan an attack on their own Guantanamo base. They're going to use Cuban friendlies dressed in Cuban military uniforms so it looks real. They'll put a group outside of the gate, have them start a riot, put some of them inside the base so it looks like they're being attacked, blow up some ammunitions, blow up a U.S. plane. Actual damage will be done to the structures. Then they're going to pretend like they capture the bad guys. Again, these are Cuban friendlies. This is all fake. And the most interesting part of this one is they're going to sink one of the U.S. ships off the coast, blame it on the Cubans, of course, and hold mock funerals for the people who died. There was no one on the ship. This is all fake. The third one involves using a drone ship off the coast of Havana or Santiago, so the civilians see what happens and believe it. Okay? The Cuban military is obviously going to be curious about this U.S. ship that's so close, so they're going to send out someone to check it out. When it gets close, they blow up the U.S. ship. That way it looks like this Cuban boat did it, but no, they didn't. Then they're going to stage rescue efforts to save the crew who might have survived the attack. Again, there was no one on the boat in the first place. The fourth tactic, this is where we see the first instance of them being willing to sacrifice innocent lives. So they're looking at a refugee boat that's going from Cuba to U.S. Blow it up. It can be real or simulated. They also say we could foster attempts on lives of Cuban refugees in the United States, even to the extent of wounding in instances to be widely publicized. You've seen already, and throughout this, that anything that happens, they're going to publicize this on the news so that people believe that the Cuban government is rash, irresponsible, they can't be trusted, they're dangerous. So the U.S. has a moral responsibility to go in and stop them. Number 5, capitalize on what Cuba is doing in other countries, publicize it, and then create more events that we do but blame it on Cuba, such as burning sugarcane fields, or perhaps a weapons shipment is found on the coast of one of these countries and we blame it on Cuba. This is the U.S. doing all of these things. How many times have we heard about weapons shipments that were intercepted by the U.S. military and blamed on another country? Was it actually, or was it us trying to justify military intervention in those countries? Will we ever know? I don't think so. Number 6. Here we see that the U.S. proposes building out a plane that looks like Cuban Air Force. The idea behind this one is to fly the fake Cuban military plane close to civilian airliners so they think that they're about to be hijacked or shot down by the Cuban military. Everyone on board will look out the window, see the Cuban plane, think that they're being attacked. Even the pilot is going to believe that they're about to be attacked. So they're going to come over on the intercom, maybe on FAA, and say, "We're being attacked. We need to make an emergency landing." It's the U.S. the whole time. Number 7 simply states that we need to have an ongoing campaign of apparent hijackings of civilian planes so people feel more fear. That's insane. But it leads us to number 8. I'm going to read direct from the document on this one. It is possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shot down a chartered civilian airliner. How are they going to make it more dramatic? They're going to say that it was a group of college students who were going on holiday, and they outline exactly how they're going to do it. So there will be 2 planes. One's a drone. One actually has people on it. These people are going to be given aliases. So the names that are on this plane don't actually exist. The planes will take off at about the same time. Civilians will land safely, exit, disappear. Those people don't exist. The drone will keep going. When it gets over Cuban airspace, they'll send out a Mayday signal. At the same time as they do that, a radio signal will trigger the destruction of this plane. That one blows my mind. I mean, we can see how that would be used and publicized, and the U.S. people and maybe even international audiences would start calling for war with Cuba. If they attacked and killed a group of college students who were just off on vacation, yeah, they seem insane, and maybe they should be taken down, right? Maybe. Number 9, the big finale. This one involves lying to the U.S. service members. This one goes into a lot of detail, so take a read if you're interested. It's going to be an Air Force exercise off the coast of Cuba. 4 planes doing a routine exercise, but before they take off, they're going to be primed to believe what's about to happen. They'll say you need to carry ammunitions just in case Cuba attacks. The pilot at the end of the formation is in on the whole gig. At some point during the flight, he'll say he's being ambushed, and then he'll cut his signal of his plane so no one can see him or find him. He's going to land safely. He's fine. By the way, this guy has an alias. He doesn't actually exist. At the same time that the plane would have crashed, a submarine is going to pop up in the area and distribute plane parts. And these 3 pilots who were in the air actually believe that they just lost a brother in arms. So they land. This is what it says. The pilots returning to Homestead would have a true story as far as they knew. Search ships and aircraft could be dispatched and parts of aircraft found. So they're going to lie to their own military members. They lie to the public. They publicize everything. They hold fake funerals. They send lists of fake victims off to the news. It is absolutely insane the lengths with which they are willing to go and lie to the American people, lie to the American people, lie to the American people.
And how do these systems really work? So this is my kind of conspiracy detection kit. The grander the conspiracy theory, the less likely it is to be true. Like say Volkswagen cheating the emission standards in Europe. That's a very specific conspiracy theory. Turned out to be true. They really did do that, and for obvious reasons, profit motive, right? But so if you scale up from that, they're trying to control the entire European economy or something like. Well, no, that's too big.
They're just trying to make money.
They're just trying to make money, right? So, the more people that have to be involved, the more elements that have to come. People are incompetent. People can't keep their mouth shut.
For the most part.
For the most part, yes. Now
he is correct for the most part that people can't keep their mouth shut. But what if the conspiracy is at the very top of government and the trickle down to the lower people in government in CIA don't exactly know what they're doing or why they're doing it? Morally, they probably know that some of the things they are doing is wrong, but they probably think that it's for the betterment of our country and to continue the great things that we have in this country, and they just want to collect a paycheck at the end of the day. So in this next set of clips, we're going to talk about MK Ultra and exactly what happened with MK Ultra and why it could potentially still be happening today. So let's get into those clips.
Even besides drugs, MK Ultra is involved in a lot of psychological experiments. So not just LSD. Most people associate MK Ultra with LSD, but one of the most expansive of the subprojects is Subproject 68. It was by this guy named Ewan Cameron. Have you heard that name before?
No.
Cameron? Okay, Ewan Cameron. He is a psychiatrist up in Montreal in Canada, working at what's called the Allen Memorial Institute. And Gottlieb wanted to expand MK Ultra besides drugs because he already had a lot of people doing drug experiments. So he wanted to see if there were psychological techniques that could be used to manipulate a person. So not just in an interrogation, but can we actually control a person's personality? Can we make them behave in certain ways, make them do something? So the idea that Ewan Cameron had come up with before the CIA is involved, I should mention Ewan Cameron is a behaviorist. So he thinks that all behavior is a result of nurture, not nature. So it's the environmental input that causes a person to behave a certain way. And he thought that if you could bring a person back down to a blank slate, remove all the environmental inputs that have been put into them, and then you can build them back up in your image into whatever you want them to be. So his idea to bring someone down to the blank slate was to induce enough stress that they forgot who they formerly were. And so you reduce them to the blank slate, and then the CIA is really interested in, if you could do that, then you could form them into whatever. So Ewan Cameron, his main goal is to try to figure out what can induce enough stress in a person to bring them down to that blank slate. And so he performs a lot of experiments. His most famous one is called psychic driving, where he was doing a therapy session, quote unquote therapy, with one of his patients, and he was recording the session, and she said something about how, my mother when I was young used to tell me blah blah blah. She said something negative to her, and so Ewan Cameron rewinded that on the tape that he was recording and made her listen back to it and said, "Hey, I want you to listen back to what you say your mother used to say to you." When he rewinded the tape and played it forward, as soon as the woman was kind of quoting her mother and she listened to that herself on the tape, she recoiled. And Cameron thought, oh, you have a negative reaction to that. So he rewinded again and again and again. And he kept rewinding it. And she just got more and more emotional, had this more and more kind of visceral reaction to what she was saying her mother used to tell her. So this led Cameron to develop the concept of psychic driving, which is you record some kind of negative message and then you make someone listen to it for thousands and thousands and thousands of times for weeks on end, for hours every day. All their waking day, they basically are strapped into a headphone that is playing this negative message, and it will break them down over time. That's how you induce enough stress to break them down to the blank slate. And then you can record a positive psychic driving message to build them up into whatever image you want them to be. So that was his initial idea.
But was it based on anything?
Not really. It was just based on he had this one encounter with this woman and she had a negative reaction. And he's just trying to induce stress. This obviously seemed to induce stress in her. Therefore, we're going to start playing these negative tapes to them.
So it was just his idea?
It's just his idea. He was known for doing this kind of thing, like kind of spur of the moment. In fact, there was one kid, basically, who had been at this Allen Memorial Institute where Ewan Cameron was. He eventually had gotten out, but he had tried to commit suicide, and so he was sent back to the Allen Memorial Institute. But the way that he had tried to commit suicide was to close the garage and have the CO2 build up with a running car, and then he would, breathe it in and pass out and die. That ended up not working. However, when he went back to the Allen Memorial Institute, Ewan Cameron thought, his personality seems like a little bit better than it was when he was here before. Maybe CO2 can influence someone, and so he sent out some of his assistants to go buy CO2 canisters, and we're going to start giving this to people. But it turns out the assistants knew that this was completely unethical. There's no medical basis for anything. And so they lied to him and said, oh, the canisters were way more expensive than we could actually afford, so we can't do that. But so he was trying to find any way that he could have a breakthrough to cure mental illness, and he was using his patients as guinea pigs.
Complete
basically.
guinea pigs.
Complete guinea pigs.
What was the result with the woman? The woman where they played the negative recordings?
There are dozens and dozens of people who that happened to. I don't know about her in particular because I don't know if she's actually named in the documents. So I don't know.
Did any of these experiments have a positive effect? Did it work?
Hardly. So that was only.
I shouldn't even say positive. I should say were they effective?
No. For the most part, the people who he did his practice on came out way worse than when they went in. So psychic driving, that's initially what got the CIA interested in Cameron. So it's important to keep in mind, it's not that the CIA told Cameron to do this. He's doing this on his own because he thinks he's going to cure mental illness by having this radical breakthrough where we break them down and build them back up, and we can build them back up and make them forget their schizophrenia or depression or whatever they have. The CIA reads his article about psychic driving, and they think this is the kind of thing we're interested in. So from that point on, they start funding him not only to do psychic driving experiments, but also he does puts people in chemical comas for months on end. And while they're in these chemical comas, he would put an audio device next to their pillow playing these psychic driving messages. And he would put them in sensory deprivation chambers for weeks. You know, they would have goggles over their eyes, earmuffs on their ears. They would have cardboard tubes over their arms so that they couldn't feel anything. And they would just be in a room for weeks on end. The idea, again, being to induce enough stress so that it breaks them down so that you can eventually build them up.
In this next set of clips, Thomas O'Neill talks about exactly how MKUltra was planned and formulated, and he goes into great depth about that. So let's get into that clip.
You brought up MKUltra.
Yes.
MKUltra was a government program run by the Central Intelligence Agency. Originally started as something called Bluebird in 1948-49, morphed into Artichoke, and then in 1952 became MKUltra. It was a mind control program, a brainwashing program. The CIA was trying to learn how to control people's behavior without their knowledge. Now, this all came out in Senate and congressional hearings in the 70s. It was exposed, but nobody knew about it until 1974 when Seymour Hersh, the New York Times reporter, reported it on the front page of the paper. So their main objective was to create what they called hypno-programmed assassins, people who would kill on command, popularly known as Manchurian candidates, after a book that was written in 1962 and later became a movie and then a movie again. The people would be, through drugs and hypnotism, the objective was to get people to go and commit an act of murder against their moral code and have no memory of their programming and be amnesic even of the act after the fact often. That was just that was their main goal, but they were also trying to create couriers, people, military people that they could implant messages, send them, across dangerous areas where there were, at that time it was the Vietnam War, and deliver messages and then have them wiped from their memory in case they were captured. They had all kinds of objectives. So Roger Smith was supervising Manson when he became he was able to do exactly what the MKUltra program had been trying to create and do for, at that point, about 15, 17 years. When it was all exposed in the 70s, and there were these hearings, first the Rockefeller Commission hearings and the church hearings, and then finally Senators Ted Kennedy and Daniel Inouye held hearings. The CIA admitted that they had done this, but no one would say exactly what they did. All the records had been destroyed when the two people who ran it, Richard Helms, who had become the director of the CIA in the 60s, and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was kind of the mad scientist who had supervised they had safe houses in San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, where they would experiment on people that were lured into these apartments and houses that were either look like brothels or hippie communes or whatever. And the people who were working at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic that was run by another Smith, which makes it a little confusing, but Dr. David Smith, who founded it, he had given an office to a scientist named Jolly West, Louis J. West, who was, when the hearings occurred in the 70s, identified as a top MKUltra researcher. He was an academic, come out of the military, had been at the University of Oklahoma, and then UCLA, running the psychiatric divisions. He denied ever being involved in MKUltra. And this was one of the moments, I think it was 2001, when, things really kind of shook the course of my reporting. Was I learned that West had been at the same place that Manson was in the Haight in the summer, that Manson became exactly what the CIA was trying to create. And I knew, actually. I'd interviewed West about 7 years before for a story I did about celebrity stalkers and people who were obsessed with stars and then only to kill them or try to kill them. And he was an expert in violence, hypnotism, brainwashing, and he was the chair of the psychiatry department at UCLA at that point. He was dead when his name came up in the Manson story, and there wasn't a lot of, I guess there was a lot of Google then, or a little bit, but when I did a little research, I found out that there had been these allegations that he'd been involved in MKUltra. He always denied it. He was never prosecuted, never even investigated. He went to his grave threatening to sue anybody that said he would have anything to do with this kind of a program. Again, through another long story, but I got access to his files, which had been left at UCLA, and they had never been processed when I called. And when I made the request, it took them 2 or 3 months to process the papers. I went through them through the whole summer looking for a needle in a haystack, and it was intuition, gut. I just thought there might be something there, and sure enough, I eventually found it. It was correspondence between Jolly West and Sidney Gottlieb, the doctor that ran MKUltra, beginning in 1953, about conducting experiments on people without their knowledge to get them to have amnesia of the acts after they were programmed, and everything that he had been accused of and denied, he did. Not only did he do it, he created the blueprint for the whole program with Gottlieb. The fact that all these kind of interesting research programs merged at the Haight, at the clinic, and then Manson came out of it with the power to do exactly what the MKUltra had been trying to create for up to that point, I thought was worth investigating further. And that's why I kept going and going and going.
They did a lot of crazy shit back then. Are you aware of Operation Midnight Climax?
Those were the safe houses in San Francisco.
Well, that was the brothel version of it. Yeah, where they lured these Johns into these brothels and then dosed them up with LSD and studied them. Yeah,
George Hunter White was the head CIA guy, and he would sit behind a two-way or one-way mirror and watch the Johns would be dosed with LSD. They tried aerosols or just drinks, different things, and then they would study their behaviors.
Aerosols?
Yeah, aerosol sprays.
Really?
Yeah.
But that would get the prostitutes too then, no?
No, the prostitutes would get them in there, and then they go to the bathroom or something, or to be in the bathroom. Yeah.
Oh,
and again, the problem is the records are so scant because Helms ordered Gottlieb to destroy all the records in 1973 when the two men left the agency. And the only reason anybody ever discovered that it existed was a whistleblower.
In this next set of clips, we're going to talk about the NSA, which is a very scary program involving our government listening in on our devices. And this next gentleman is Thomas Drake, an NSA whistleblower who was able to come out and talk about exactly what was going on in the NSA. So let's listen to what he has to say.
And we're talking to Thomas Drake, legend, one of the greatest whistleblowers in American history. You may not know the name, but there were 2 ways in this book written about you. You didn't write the book, but it was about you and Ed Snowden. There were 2 ways that they talked about blowing the whistle. One is to go the traditional route, to go through Congress and so forth and so on. And the other is to kind of be a civil disobedient and go to journalists. Ed Snowden took the latter. You tried to do the right thing. Are those basically the only 2 ways one can blow the whistle? Or how does it work?
Well, there are formal channels by which you can blow the whistle, and government wrongdoing, fraud, violations of the law. And those channels exist. They're actually well advertised even within the system. They have posters hanging on, the walls as you're walking down the hall.
At the NSA they had those
Even
posters?
at the NSA,
Wow.
yes.
Wow.
However, there are also exposure channels, because obviously if you're blowing the whistle, especially on your own agency, they're not going to take too kindly to you sort of airing the dirty laundry, even in secret.
It's kind of just the human nature, isn't it? Just people don't want their ego bruised if you tell the truth. The people that your superiors are not happy about that.
Telling your truth is extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous.
As I said to you last night, there's a little bit of a hesitation I have, because I don't know if I fully trust the government.
I wouldn't.
the powers that be often want to know what I know. It's almost like they want to know what I know to be true more than they want to know, more they want to reform.
In this realm, this kind of knowledge, especially it's knowledge that a lot of people would prefer not to go public, has a lot of power in itself. But there are a lot of people that benefit from this. Why would you want to upset the cart, as it were, as long as everybody's making something off the scam, off the racket, off the particular contract vehicle that's used, then why blow the whistle? Everybody's getting something from it, just some more, maybe getting a little bit more than others.
What Thomas is saying here is that everyone is making money from this. At the highest levels, they're making billions. At the lowest levels, they're just making a paycheck. They're trying to pay their mortgage. They're trying to get a pension so they can retire. They don't want to blow the whistle and risk losing everything that they worked so hard for. And that is why Thomas is such a hero, because he was willing to risk all that, his family, everything, just to let people know exactly what was going on inside the NSA. Now, let's go forward and look at more of what Thomas has to say.
It's a $100 billion program, this program in particular. So what strikes me is that everyone is benefiting from it. I mean, it's like trickle-down economics.
Yes.
Congresswomen's wives, people in their mortgages, their kids' private school educations. You can't take away 100. It's 5% of the U.S. deficit off of this 8A.
This is why it's very hard to break these systems, because a lot of people are benefiting from it, all the way down to the lowest level, even if you're making what you would call a reasonable salary at the bottom level. But the people that really get hurt, ultimately, although they're sort of the amorphous mass, is the American taxpayer.
Well, Bill Binney says it's all run by money. And that's something I told you last night. It took me, I'm 41, it took me like 40 years to figure that out. And I came to that conclusion when I made the movie Line in the Sand about the cartel. I just found it was all about money. Do you agree with that statement? It's about money?
Eisenhower actually warned the nation about this in his farewell address, which at the time was hardly even noted, but it's become quite famous in terms of what he said about the military-industrial complex.
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
He knew what he kind of unleashed in the 1950s. And his concern was that it would end up being a controlling mechanism in government. It would be a corrupting mechanism in government. And he was basically, in his own way, was blowing the whistle on himself and his own 8 years, his 8 years in office as the President of the United States, because he saw what was starting to already happen in the early 60s.
As they talked about, the military-industrial complex is all about the wealthy getting rich and everybody else just falling in line. And that's why I respect this man so much, because he wasn't willing to just fall in line. He wanted to let everyone know exactly what was going on in our country, and he's a hero for that. And let's move forward.
I certainly couldn't remain silent in terms of the abuse of the Fourth Amendment, in terms of
the First
the surveillance
and Fourth
regime.
Amendment are in your position. You've said that those are the most important ones.
If you go back to the very basis for the American Revolution, the thing that actually makes us American, I would argue, is encapsulated in the First and Fourth Amendment.
Why do you believe that to be just the American founding is so?
It's
connected?
cornerstone in terms of, remember, all the usurpations that were identified in the Declaration of Independence against King George III. Mm-hmm. It was fundamental. You couldn't speak out. You couldn't freely publish. And if they came, one of the officers of the Crown could show over the piece of paper and literally take away your effects, your papers, or even your person, just with a piece of paper. You had no due process. There was no protection against that.
But let's go back to that time period, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007. You go to the congressional subcommittees. What exactly, we know Ed Snowden, what he did. What were you blowing the whistle on at the NSA at the time?
3 primary areas: the 9/11 intelligence failures and subsequent cover-up at NSA, which was quite extraordinary. In fact, they kept a whole lot from all the formal investigations, both the congressional investigations, and there was 2 of them that I was a material witness on. Thousands of pages of documents were given to the investigators. I had to do depositions where you're giving oral testimony as well. Mm-hmm. I also was part of a DOD-IG investigation involving the largest, basically at the time, it was by far the largest contracted program in NSA called Trailblazer.
In this clip, we're going to talk about how the government chose a competing program that lacked the privacy of the American people 3 weeks before 9/11 just to move their agenda forward.
Trailblazer.
And there was requirements for Trailblazer, but most all those requirements had been satisfied by, in part, by another program called Thin Thread.
Thin Thread. These sound like out of a Jason Bourne movie, by the way.
there is that element to all of this. There is the sort of a Jason Bourne element to all this without all the violence.
And briefly, what is Trailblazer and what is Thin Thread?
Well, let's go back just a little bit and then accelerate forward. So the internet age explodes in the 90s. Extraordinary period. Extraordinary. But it's really the digital age had existed for a while, but now the internet had existed for a while. But now there's this rapid transition from the analog era of the information age to the digital age, the digital era. Massive amounts of data, because it's far easier to generate data in the digital space than it was in the analog space. NSA knew, this is right after the Cold War, they actually identified the challenge they faced with the digital age. How do you, it's one thing to collect all this, but how do you make sense of it? All the methods they had used and had been quite successful at back in the 50s and 60s and on well into the 70s and 80s were coming up short. So they knew they had a problem. Well, at NSA, because it's much more of an engineering organization in terms of, hey, we got a problem, let's solve it. Classic, necessity is the mother of invention. That famous phrase in terms of American industry, going back to the industrial age. So sure enough, small teams solved what we refer to as the big data problem. That was Thin Thread. It was ready to go well prior to 9/11. Mm-hmm. But it only cost about, when it was developed, a little over $3 million. But in the year 2000, 2001, there were some preliminaries, just to make a long story short. They awarded a multi-billion-dollar program to SEIC and a bunch of subprimes. Almost $4 billion, or the original program, prior to 9/11. That was their answer. And instead of relying on the ingenuity and the best of American inventiveness, they said, you know what? We're going to buy the solution. We're not going to make it. But the kicker for me, which is still to this day surreal, that solution had already been made and was being rapidly improved. But they decide we're going to go out to industry, kind of like we're going to do in part what was done during World War II with the Manhattan Project. But we're just going to spend a whole boatload of money on some contractors and they'll figure it out. Now you're the contractor and you can imagine, if your eyes get really big because you're seeing massive amounts of money that you're going to be able to live off of for the next several years.
And Trailblazer?
They never developed anything. Nothing was ever put in the field. And they had shut down. This was right before 9/11, although Trailblazers went on going for a number of years. Because remember, after 9/11, the Congress basically comes to NSA and says, how much money do you need? As if more money was going to be the answer. In most cases, it's never about more money.
What is it about?
It's about solving the problem. Why do you need, but if you want to just make money, yeah, we'll find ways to spend money. So you're incentivized not to solve the problem.
Incentives are not aligned.
No, you're incentivized to keep the money flowing.
So those 4 months were a blur for you. You go to your supervisor, she shrugs her shoulders, and then
within just days of 9/11. The reason, this is critical. 9/11 was a failure to keep people out of harm's way. 9/11 was a failure, systemic failure to protect the nation. But the system had been blinking red for years. Even George Tenet sent out a memo 3 years earlier saying the system is blinking red. There was all kinds of indications, but this is post-Cold War. NSA was still trying to sort out like who's the next threat, who's the enemy. This is clearly a non-state actor, transnational, which I was very familiar with because I had worked in a previous assignment as a commissioned officer in the Navy down at the Pentagon in the Alert Center, the National Military Joint Intelligence Center, sitting on the terrorism desk in 1993 when they tried to drop the World Trade Center towers the first time. 6 people died. I remember we were on the desk. It was a small team. We're in the alert center. We were sending out reports based on very advanced analysis. These they mean business. Al-Qaeda and company means business. They're not going to rest. They're going to come back and they want to make it spectacular. We warned, I remember they're going to come back. We even made reference to airplanes. They'll use everything possible. So I'm sitting there literally on shift, and the J2, who was one of the general, he's a general, but he was considered the chief military intelligence officer. He reported directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He comes down because he's been reading the reports that we're sending out from the terrorism desk. He's sitting there talking to the senior duty officer. He says, "Yeah, I'm reading all your reports." Shaking his head at the same time, he says, "Who cares about some raghead spouting off fatwas in the desert?"
What year was that?
1993.
So about 8 years before 9/11.
This is after they tried to drop the Trade Center towers the first time.
Imagine if you had that on video.
We had extraordinary powers during the Cold War in terms of collection of intelligence and making sense of it. We were listening in on any number of countries and across any number of networks and picking up signals from all kinds of different devices. Push-to-talk radios, you name it, right? Across the the electromagnetic spectrum, high-end radars, all that. An amazing system that was set up in those decades after World War II. Why? We would never be surprised again. We would never be surprised again.
To me, never being surprised again means that we never let any event happen again in this country. And of course, we all know that 9/11 happened and it changed the course of our country forever. Supposedly, we were surprised by Pearl Harbor, but 9/11 was never supposed to happen because of Pearl Harbor.
A la 7 December 1941 with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. We will never again experience a surprise electronically. So we were trained, what are the norms, what's standard behavior, operating behavior of adversary nations or nations you have an interest in. And then anything that's different, you report on it. And depending on the level, it could get to the point where if it's serious enough, you would have to be on the president's desk within 10 minutes. 9/11 ended up, in essence, being, I was going to say, a positive flag, not a false flag, to engage in activity that was entirely prohibited or constrained by the Constitution. But remember what Jefferson said about the Constitution. The chains of the Constitution bind us. Remember what Madison said about ambition meeting ambition. That was part of the checks and balances.
And this is something that Ed Snowden said, quote, "We had a guy, Thomas Drake," this is from Edward Snowden, "we had a guy, Drake, who did absolutely everything right. He placed his faith in the system. He saw the warrantless wiretapping of hundreds of millions of Americans while at the NSA. He saw corruption in procurement process, in standards adoptions, and things like that. He brought it to the Inspector General. He brought it to Congress. And rather than protecting him, they actively retaliated against him in the most public, aggressive way to send a message to everybody that things were different now." That's what Ed Snowden said about you.
In this next clip, Edward Snowden is going to explain to us exactly what is going on with our phones when you talk about that product and then it comes up. It's because they're still listening to us, and our phones are not protected the way we think that they are. So let's listen in on what Ed has to say about this.
Are you aware at all of the current state of surveillance and what, if anything, has changed since your revelations?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that's changed since I was in 2013 is now it's mobile first everything. Mobile was still a big deal, right? And the intelligence community was very much grappling to get its hands around it and to deal with it. But now people are much less likely to use a laptop than use a desktop than use, any kind of wired phone than they are to use a smartphone. And both Apple and Android devices, unfortunately, are not especially good in protecting your privacy. Think right now. You got a smartphone, right? You might be listening to this on a train somewhere in traffic right now. Or you, Joe, right now. You got a phone somewhere in the room, right? The phone is turned off, or at least the screen is turned off. It's sitting there. It's powered on. And if somebody sends you a message, the screen blinks to life. How does that happen? Right? How is it that if someone from any corner of the earth dials a number, your phone rings and nobody else's rings? How is it that you can dial anybody else's number and only their phone rings, right? Every smartphone, every phone at all, is constantly connected to the nearest cellular tower. Every phone, even when the screen is off, you think it's doing nothing, you can't see it because radio frequency emissions are invisible. It's screaming in the air, saying, here I am, here I am. Here is my IMEI, I think it's individual manufacturer's equipment identity, and IMEI, individual manufacturer's subscriber identity. I could be wrong on the breakout there, but the acronyms are the IMEI and the IMSI, and you can search for these things. They're two globally unique identifiers that only exist anywhere in the world in one place, right? This makes your phone different than all the other phones. The IMEI is burned into the handset of your phone. No matter what SIM card you change to, it's always going to be the same, and it's always going to be telling the phone network it's this physical handset. Then the IMESI is in your SIM card, right? And this is what holds your phone number, right? It's basically the key, the right to use that phone number. And so your phone is sitting there doing nothing, you think, but it's constantly shouting and saying, I'm here. Who is closest to me? That's a cell phone tower. And every cell phone tower with its big ears is listening for these little cries for help and going, all right, I see Joe Rogan's phone, right? I see Jamie's phone. I see all these phones that are here right now. And it compares notes with the other network towers, and your smartphone compares notes with them to go, who do I hear the loudest? And who you hear the loudest is a proxy for proximity, for closeness, distance, right? They go, whoever I hear more loudly than anybody else, that's close to me. So you're going to be bound to this cell phone tower, and that cell phone tower is going to make a note, a permanent record, saying this phone handset with this phone number at this time was connected to me, right? And based on your phone handset and your phone number, they can get your identity, right? Because you pay for this stuff with your credit card and everything like that. And even if you don't, right, it's still active at your house overnight. It's still active, on your nightstand when you're sleeping. It's still whatever. The movements of your phone are the movements of you as a person, and those are often quite uniquely identifying. It goes to your home. It goes to your workplace. Other people don't have it. Sorry. And anyway, it's constantly shouting this out, and then it compares notes with the other parts of the network. And when somebody is trying to get to a phone, it compares notes. The network compares notes to go, where is this phone with this phone number in the world right now? And to that cell phone tower that is closest to that phone, it sends out a signal saying, we have a call for you. Make your phone start ringing so your owner can answer it. And then it connects it across this whole path. But what this means is that whenever you're carrying a phone, whenever the phone is turned on, there's a record of your presence at that place that is being made and created by companies. It does not need to be kept forever, and in fact, there's no good argument for it to be kept forever, but these companies see that as valuable information, right? This is the whole big data problem that we're running into, and all this information that used to be ephemeral, right? Where were you when you were 8 years old, Where'd you go after you had a bad breakup? Who'd you spend the night with? Who'd you call after? All this information used to be ephemeral, meaning it disappeared, right? Like the morning dew, it would be gone. No one would remember it. But now these things are stored. Now these things are saved. It doesn't matter whether you're doing anything wrong. It doesn't matter whether you're the most ordinary person on Earth, because that's how bulk collection, which is the government's euphemism for mass surveillance, works. They simply collect it all in advance in hopes that one day it will become useful. And that was just talking about how you connect to the phone network.
As Edward says here, it's all about collecting data and knowing all of the intricacies of your personality and what you do, where you go, why do you go there, why do you spend money on this or that. It's a scary thing that can be used against you in many, many ways. And next, we're going to talk about where does the upper echelon of the government figure out that they're going to do these types of things. And they do these types of things at a place called Bohemian Grove. So let's get into that. In this clip, Alex Jones, love him or hate him, he's going to talk to you about Bohemian Grove and exactly what goes on at Bohemian Grove.
I'm Alex Jones, and I'm a radio and television host based in Austin, Texas. And for many years, I've been exposing the criminal activities of the global elite, also known as the New World Order. In past films, we've documented the centralization of power, the move towards world government, the attack on the nation state, self-defense, the Second Amendment, family values, that is, the family itself, as well as private property rights. But time and time again in my research, I come, eye to eye with something that's even hard for me to believe. And that's that the elite, again, the so-called establishment kings, those that know best, the visions of the anointed ones, are obsessed with the occult, from presidents to governors to the heads of industry. We've all seen the stories of presidents and first ladies obsessed with their astrologers making national policy decisions upon their recommendations, spiritual guides, shamans in the White House. My friends, it gets far worse than that. The Bohemian Club, as it's known today, was founded in 1873 in San Francisco in Northern California. Many of the club's original annals, dating back to before the turn of the century, admit that local artists, writers, newspapermen, you name it, wanted a place away from the so-called backwardsness of the West Coast, the Judeo-Christian ethic. They found that place an hour and a half north of San Francisco, outside of the tiny town of Monterrey. Their annals even admit an obsession with the occult and what they called Druid rituals. Amongst the great redwood trees, they revived ancient ceremonies that in truth had their roots not in the Druids, but in Babylon itself. By the turn of the century, there was already a 10 to 15-year waiting list. Presidents from Howard Taft to Herbert Hoover were on the membership roster. Not to mention, later, famous war general Dwight D. Eisenhower, later to become president. The roster of the Bohemian Club reads like a who's who of the elite. Look at this photo taken inside the Grove back in 1963. There you'll see Ronald Reagan. And sitting two people over from him, later to become president, Richard Milhous Nixon. Frankly, we don't know if these men actively enjoy the things that go on inside the Bohemian Club. But one thing is perfectly certain from the evidence. They are forced to go and attend and take part in these activities if they wish to be elevated to the highest levels of the geopolitical power structure. Take George Bush Sr., documented member. And then, of course, there's his son. Now, the last 4 generations of Bushes have also attended the Skull and Bones Society at Yale, well known to be steeped in the occult. Then there's Bill Clinton, a frequent attendee. Upon closer inspection, the entire federal government at the highest levels is infested with Bohemian Club members. And it doesn't stop there. America's private run-for-profit Federal Reserve Bank, from its very inception in 1913, has been run by prominent members of the Bohemian Club. Central Bank Chairman Alan Greenspan was seen leaving the Bohemian Grove only 1 month before he was appointed chairman of the Federal Reserve. He had to be a made man. To be a member of the most powerful cabal on the planet. Historical records are clear from major universities. The Manhattan Project was planned and instituted and run from the Bohemian Club. Because you can clearly see that the mantra in the spin story has been picked up as a front by all the local media. Sure, they're elitist. Sure, they have some bizarre rituals. But what's the big deal? They're just having fun. If that was the case, why would David Gergen, presidential advisor to President Clinton, resign from the Bohemian Club and 17 other organizations when it was revealed in 1993? Organizations like the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group. But it's not just the Washington Times and the Sacramento Bee. You're looking at an illustration from the pages of Parade magazine, February 22nd, 1981. This story was the most accurate and revealing, detailing the so-called mock human sacrifice. Former German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt wrote extensively in his memoirs, Men and Powers, a Political Retrospective, goes into great detail about the secret establishment running the world, the Trilateral Commission, the CFR, the Bilderberg Group, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, the Bohemian Grove, a place that he often talked about being a wonderful hideaway, a place to spend time with Nelson and David Rockefeller, and to talk about world government and steering societies.
Steering societies. That is a scary thing to talk about, but it's the truth. They really want to steer society in one way or another. That's why they use social media to put on your algorithm things that you agree with, things that get you angry, things that get you heated, all to steer you towards one side or another and divide and conquer us as a society. That's why we have to stick together. People you don't agree with, you should have conversations with, talk to them, see where their point of view is and not just get angry immediately, because our media is the thing that is steering us. And in this last set of clips, Operation Mockingbird, a program that was set up and ran by the CIA to steer the narrative and get you away from exactly what the truth is.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here, because this would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country. Now, we're looking at that very carefully.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole News and Public Affairs operation in 1954, the ships had been established, and I was told about them and asked if I'd carry on with them.
We have quite a lot of detailed information, and we will evaluate it, and we will include any evidence of wrongdoing or any evidence of impropriety in our final report and make recommendations.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
Senator, do you think that you named the news organizations in your final report?
That remains to be decided.
I think it was entirely in order for our correspondents at that time to make use of CIA agent chiefs of station and other members of the executive staff of CIA as sources of information which were useful in their assessments of world conditions.
Would you say that continues today?
Well, I would think probably for a reporter it would continue today, but because of all of the revelations of the period of the 1970s, it seems to me that a reporter's got to be much more circumspect in doing it now, or he runs the risk of at least being looked at with considerable disfavor by the public. I think you've got to be much more careful about it.
Obviously, someone has to be more careful about the stories that the media puts out. But if they're all being paid by one or two, maybe three corporations that trickles down the news that they want us to hear, who is at fault? Is it us or is it them? Let's continue.
More legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds. And this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. You also work on their human vulnerabilities to recruit them in a classic sense, to make them your agent so that you can control what they do, so you don't have to set them up sort of, by putting one over on them. So you can say, here, plant this one next Tuesday.
Can you do this with responsible reporters?
Yes, the Church Committee brought it out in 1975, and then Woodward and Bernstein put an article in Rolling Stone a couple of years later. 400 journalists cooperating with the CIA, including some of the biggest names in the business, to consciously introduce the stories into the press.
Well, give me a concrete example of how you use the press this way.
Well, for example, in my war, the Angola War that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Times, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Times. But after that point, the journalists at Reuters and AFP the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast.
And that means you can't rely on the media as it is today either.
Oh, of course not. All the media in this country, radio, television, and print, is all owned by 5 corporations. All of these corporations that own the media are owned and controlled, and members of the Council on Foreign Relations sit on their board of directors. Remember, if you go down and you trace the ownership of a station or a newspaper, and you get to a corporation, remember that somebody owns that corporation, and it's usually another corporation. But when you trace the interlocking of all these things, when you get to the top, there's 5. And all journalists know that there's some things you don't write about and you don't talk about because you'll lose your job. And that's where the control is. And that's why they pay anchormen like Dan Rather $2 million a year, because he doesn't question them. He knows that if he goes against them, he's going to lose $2 million a year. Do you think a man that looks pretty and sits in front of a TV camera for the 6 o'clock news is worth $2 million a year? No way. I don't care how long he works, and I don't care what he does. There is no job worth $2 million a year. That's why they pay athletes these fantastic salaries. I was listening to the radio the other day. They just contracted to pay one player on one team $6 million a year. Can you believe this?
And why is that?
It's the Roman circus. What does the emperor do when the people become restive, and when the people are asking questions, and when the people don't like the policies of the emperor? He sends them to the circus. He creates a circus. He builds a giant coliseum. And he begins to throw the Christians to the lions. And he has great chariot races and football games and basketball games, all to keep the idiots preoccupied with things that don't mean anything in the scheme of the entire world, so that they don't have the time to learn what the truth is, so they don't ever get smart enough to learn how they're being manipulated.
And agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.